Welcome to Detachment Diaries. This channel is about situationships, emotional patterns, and personal growth. I share stories from my past, not to shame anyone, but to understand myself and learn. If you relate to patterns of attachment, ambiguity, or emotional cycles, you're in the right place. After all those experiences I've had, after the confusion, the heartbreak, the mixed signals, the overthinking, and honestly hitting emotional rock bottom at some points, I eventually reached a moment where I realized something had to change. Not outside of me, inside of me. Because for a long time, I kept thinking the solution was finding the right guy. But eventually, I had to face the uncomfortable truth that something in my patterns also needed to change. And that realization started a process that was honestly painful. Because change isn't like flipping a switch where suddenly you're a completely different person. It's slow, it's messy, and it's definitely not linear. There are moments where you feel like you've grown so much, and then suddenly something triggers you and you feel like you're back at square one. But what I've realized over time is that those moments don't mean you haven't grown. Sometimes it just means you're noticing things now that you didn't notice before. Awareness itself is already growth. And when I look back now, I can see that I've actually come much further than I realized while I was in the middle of the process. So how did I actually change after all those experiences? One of the biggest shifts happened in how I date. Before, I used to approach dating with a lot of openness, which sounds good in theory, don't get me wrong, but in practice, it meant I tolerated things that weren't really aligned with what I wanted. For example, when I was using dating apps before, if someone suggested something casual or friends with benefits, I would sometimes still continue the conversation just to see how it goes. Maybe I thought it could turn into something more. Maybe I didn't want to close the door too early. But now I approach it very differently. If someone tells me upfront that they're only looking for something casual, I simply say, sorry, we're looking for different things. And that's it. No overthinking, no trying to convince them, no trying to change their mind, just clarity. And surprisingly, that simple boundary changed a lot about my dating experience. Because once I started filtering more intentionally, I started matching with people who were actually more aligned with what I wanted. I also became much more comfortable walking away earlier. Before, I used to believe that you had to meet someone in person first to really know if there was potential. But now, I pay much more attention to the early conversations. If someone already shows red flags in the getting to know stage, if something they say feels misaligned with my values, if I feel like I'm already adjusting myself just to keep the conversation going, I don't force it anymore. I don't waste time meeting them just to confirm what I already feel. I simply move on. Another big shift was identifying my non-negotiables. Before, I had preferences, but I didn't always enforce them. I would compromise, I would rationalize things, I would tell myself maybe I was being too picky. But now I understand that having standards isn't the same as being unrealistic. Standards simply mean you respect your own needs. So if something feels wrong for me, I'm no longer afraid to say, sorry, we're not a match. And I say it calmly, without guilt, without feeling like I'm rejecting someone as a person. It just means we're not aligned. And a huge part of that shift came from letting go of the scarcity mindset. For a long time, I subconsciously believed that good connections were rare. So when I met someone interesting, I felt like I had to hold on to it, even if parts of it didn't feel right. But over time, I realized something important. There are so many people in the world, and if something is genuinely meant to work, it won't require me to shrink myself or tolerate behavior that makes me uncomfortable. Once I started operating from more of an abundance mindset, dating actually became much less stressful. Because instead of thinking, what if this is my only chance? I started thinking, if this isn't aligned, something else will be. And that mindset had a very noticeable effect on my nervous system. Before, dating often made me anxious. If someone stopped replying, I would spiral. I would overthink. I would wonder what I did wrong. But now when someone disappears or ghosts, my reaction is very different. I simply think, okay, he's not for me. And I move on. Not because I'm pretending not to care, but because I no longer see someone else's inconsistency as a reflection of my worth. When you stop chasing people who aren't choosing you, something inside you becomes calmer. You stop over-investing your energy into uncertainty. You let connections unfold naturally instead of forcing them. And I think that shift is also connected to something deeper. Before, I had more of an anxious attachment pattern. If I liked someone, I leaned in harder. I chased. I tried to make the connection work. But now, my mindset has changed. I'm no longer attracted to people who don't choose me. And that's a huge difference. Because attraction used to be driven by excitement and chemistry alone. Now, attraction is also influenced by consistency and emotional availability. If someone isn't showing up for me, the attraction actually fades instead of increasing. Another big change is where I get my validation from. In the past, I think part of my dating behavior was tied to external validation. Being liked by someone, being chosen, feeling desired. But now, that validation comes much from within. I know my value, and when you genuinely believe you're the prize, you don't need constant reassurance from someone else to prove it. You don't chase, you don't beg for attention, you don't lower your standards just to keep someone around. If someone can't meet your standards, they leave, not you lowering them. And maybe one of the most underrated changes is this. My life feels full now. Before, dating sometimes felt like a central part of my life. Now it's just one part of it. I have hobbies, I have friends, I have my own routines and interests. So our relationship is no longer something that completes my life. It's something that adds to it. It's a want, not a need. And I think that's one of the healthiest places to approach dating from. Because when you're already fulfilled on your own, you're much less likely to tolerate things that disrupt your peace. So if I look at the person I became after all these experiences, I'm calmer, more intentional, more protective of my energy, and most importantly, I don't abandon myself anymore just to keep someone else. Those experiences with all those different people, even the painful ones, they didn't just teach me about dating. They taught me about myself. And maybe that's the real transformation. Not becoming someone completely new, but becoming someone who finally knows their worth and acts accordingly.